Jai-Ho Kim stood at the docking bay window, watching as the massive blue-green planet grew smaller behind him. Earth, his home, faded to a tiny dot as the transport ship accelerated toward the Galactic Academy of Sciences. He clutched his acceptance letter, still hardly believing he would be the first human to study at the most prestigious institution in the known universe. After 3 weeks in hyperspace, the ship finally approached Centauri Station, a massive ring-shaped structure orbiting a golden star. The station housed the Academy, where beings from 100 different worlds came to study the secrets of the cosmos. Approaching final docking sequence, announced the ship's eye. All passengers prepare for arrival procedures. Jai-Ho gathered his few belongings. 22 years old and already accomplished in quantum physics on Earth, he still felt like a child about to enter a room of adults. The acceptance had been unexpected. Humans were still new to the galactic community, only having achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. The ship docked with a gentle bump. Jai-Ho joined the line of diverse beings heading toward the exit. Many had additional limbs, unusual skin colors, or features he couldn't even describe. He tried not to stare. An Arcturian official met him at the Academy entrance, tall and slender with blue-tinted skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern. The nameplate read Administrator Loney. "Student Kim, your credentials, please," Loney said, voice musical but formal. Jai-Ho handed over his documents, his hand shaking slightly. "First human at the Academy," Loney noted, 2 eyes blinking while the other 2 continued examining the paperwork. "Quite unusual. The board must have seen something special in your application." "Thank you," Jai-Ho said. "I'm honored to be here." Loney handed him a small device. "Your room assignment and schedule. Classes begin tomorrow. Professor Doral will be your faculty advisor." The hallways of the Academy gleamed with a pearly light. Jai-Ho followed the map on his device to the dormitory section. Students of various species moved purposefully through the corridors, some floating, others walking on multiple legs. He felt overwhelmingly out of place. His room was small but comfortable, with a bed adjusted to human proportions and a desk with holographic interfaces. After setting down his bag, he decided to find the physics department to introduce himself to his advisor. The physics wing housed laboratories filled with equipment he had only read about in theoretical papers. Through transparent walls, he saw students manipulating gravity fields and bending light in ways Earth scientists had only dreamed of. At the end of the hallway stood a door labeled Professor Doral, Department Chair, Cosmic Physics. Jai-Ho took a deep breath and knocked. "Enter," came a deep, resonant voice. The office was spacious, with models of strange celestial phenomena hanging from the ceiling. Behind a curved desk sat Professor Doral, an Arcturian with darker blue skin than Administrator Loney, indicating advanced age. All 4 of his eyes focused on Jai-Ho with clear displeasure. "Ah, the human," Professor Doral said, making no effort to rise or extend a greeting. "I wondered when you would appear." "Good afternoon, Professor. I'm Jai-Ho Kim. I was told you're my advisor." "Indeed, though not by my choice." The professor gestured to a chair. "Sit." Jai-Ho sat, trying to maintain his composure. "I reviewed your application materials," Doral said. "Impressive for a human, I suppose. But you should understand that the Academy operates at a level far beyond what your species has achieved. Many believe the Council accepted you as a political gesture." Jai-Ho's face grew warm. "With respect, Professor, my work on quantum resonance theory was published in Earth's top journals." "Earth's journals," Doral repeated with what sounded like amusement. "We've been studying quantum resonance for 300 years. Your species has barely learned to leave its own solar system." The professor pulled up a holographic display. "I've adjusted your course schedule. You'll begin with remedial classes in basic principles before attempting any advanced work." Jai-Ho leaned forward, examining the schedule. These were introductory courses, far below his qualifications. "But Professor, I've already mastered these concepts. My entrance exams." showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how the universe actually functions. Doral interrupted. Humans lack the neural capacity to grasp certain concepts. It's not your fault. It's biological. Jaiho fought to keep his voice steady. I'd like the chance to prove myself with standard coursework. And you'll have it, after you demonstrate competency in the basics. All four of Doral's eyes narrowed. Unless you wish to withdraw your enrollment. No, sir. I'll stay. As expected, humans are nothing if not stubborn. Doral turned his attention to another display. That will be all. Student Kim. Jaiho left the office, hands clenched into fists. In the hallway, he nearly collided with another student, a Viridian with emerald scales and golden eyes. First day, the Viridian asked. Jaiho nodded. That obvious. You just met with Doral, and you're still standing. Impressive. The Viridian extended a three-fingered hand. I'm Taro. Third year quantum mechanics. Jaiho. First year, apparently remedial everything. Taro made a sympathetic clicking sound. Doral has issues with new species. Did the same to the Forians last decade. Don't let him discourage you. Is he always like that? Always. But there's a library terminal that can access any research in the galaxy. Real learning happens there, not in his classroom. Jaiho smiled for the first time since arriving. Thanks for the tip. The library is where you'll find Sumin too. She's from your planet. Only human researcher here. Been working in the archives for 2 years. Jaiho's eyes widened. Another human. I thought I was the first. First student. She's staff. Good person to know. Taro checked the time. Orientation dinner in the Great Hall in 1 hour. You coming? Wouldn't miss it. As Taro headed off, Jaiho felt a surge of determination. Professor Doral clearly expected him to fail, but he hadn't come all this way to give up at the first obstacle. He would prove himself, not just for his own sake, but for all humans who might follow. The stars visible through the corridor windows seemed to shine brighter now. This was just the beginning of his journey at the Galactic Academy, and despite Professor Doral's prejudice, Jaiho was certain of one thing. He belonged among those stars. Jaiho found the Academy library on his third day, a vast circular chamber with shelves that seemed to stretch infinitely upward. Knowledge crystals containing billions of research papers from across the galaxy glowed in soft blues and purples. Holographic terminals floated at various heights, some occupied by students with tentacles, others by beings made of pure energy. Can I help you? Asked a voice behind him. Jaiho turned to see a human woman, perhaps a few years older than himself, wearing the gray uniform of Academy staff. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she carried several data crystals. Are you Sumin? Jaiho asked, remembering Taro's mention of another human. She smiled. I am. And you must be Jaiho. News travels fast when a second human arrives at the Academy. I was told you could help me navigate this place. Of course. Sumin led him deeper into the library. 2 weeks in remedial classes, and you're already looking for advanced research. Jaiho sighed. You heard about that too. Professor Doral makes no secret of his opinions about humans. It happened to me when I first arrived as a research assistant. She stopped at a quiet alcove with a terminal. This one's linked directly to the quantum physics archive. Not even Doral can monitor what you study here. Thank you. Jaiho hesitated. Can I ask how you dealt with it? The prejudice. Sumin's expression grew serious. I work twice as hard as everyone else. Humans might be newcomers, but our brains make connections others don't. That's our advantage. Over the next few weeks, Jaiho fell into a routine. By day, he sat through remedial classes, answering questions that any first-year Earth physics student could solve. By night, he studied in the library, absorbing advanced concepts in cosmic physics that even Earth's best scientists hadn't considered. Sumin became his guide, helping him understand the cultural contexts behind scientific papers from different worlds. Taro occasionally joined them, explaining Arcturian thought patterns and why Professor Doral might be so resistant to human potential. Arcturians dominated cosmic physics for 1,000 years, Tarot explained one evening. New perspectives threaten their intellectual authority. Jai-Ho nodded, studying a paper on quantum resonance between parallel dimensions. This theory has a flaw, he said suddenly. Su-Min leaned over. Where? Here. They assume symmetrical distribution across dimensional boundaries, but that contradicts what we know about observer effects. Jai-Ho began working on calculations, sketching ideas on a holographic notepad. For 3 days, he barely slept, developing an alternative theory that accounted for dimensional asymmetry. When he finished, even Su-Min looked impressed. This is groundbreaking, she said. You should submit it for publication. To the Academy Journal, Jai-Ho asked. Absolutely. Even Doral would have to acknowledge this contribution. The submission process was straightforward. Jai-Ho sent his paper, Asymmetrical Quantum Resonance in Multidimensional Frameworks, to the Academy's Scientific Committee, which included Professor Doral as chief editor. 2 days later, Jai-Ho received a message to come to Doral's office immediately. You submitted this? Doral asked when Jai-Ho entered, displaying the paper on a screen. Yes, Professor. Impossible. All 4 of Doral's eyes narrowed. No human could have developed this theory. Who helped you? Jai-Ho stood straighter. I developed it myself, based on research in the library archives. This paper will not be published, Doral said flatly. The concept exceeds your capabilities. I must assume you've plagiarized this work, perhaps from unpublished Arcturian research. That's not true. I can explain every calculation. Enough. Doral's voice thundered. I've been teaching cosmic physics for 200 years. I know what primitive species are capable of understanding. Your continued presence at this academy is becoming problematic. Jai-Ho clenched his fists. Is there another way I can prove the work is mine? Doral paused. The Interstellar Research Competition begins next month. If you insist on pushing this theory, present it there. In public, when you fail to defend it against real scientists, perhaps you'll finally understand your limitations. After leaving Doral's office, Jai-Ho found Su-Min in the library, her face concerned. He accused me of cheating, Jai-Ho told her. Said I'll have to defend my theory at the competition. Su-Min's eyes widened. The Interstellar Competition. That's where the galaxy's top researchers present breakthrough theories. Most students don't qualify until their final year. He's setting me up to fail, Jai-Ho said. Maybe. Or maybe he's giving you the perfect stage to prove him wrong. Su-Min touched his arm. I've seen your work. It's brilliant. Different from Arcturian approaches, but that's what makes it valuable. Tarot joined them later, bringing information about the competition. 3 stages, he explained. First, written submission. Second, theoretical defense before a panel of 5 judges from different species. Third, practical demonstration. Demonstration. Jai-Ho asked. How do I demonstrate quantum resonance between dimensions? That's the challenge, Tarot said. You'll need lab time, equipment, which Doral won't approve, Su-Min added. Jai-Ho thought for a moment. What about Lab 7? It's always empty during night cycle. Su-Min looked concerned. Using it without authorization could get you expelled. And failing to demonstrate my theory will accomplish what? Jai-Ho shook his head. I have to try. For the next 3 weeks, Jai-Ho worked through the night in Lab 7, constructing a device that could detect quantum resonance across dimensional boundaries. During the day, he continued attending his remedial classes, where Doral increasingly singled him out with impossible questions. Student Kim, explain why thorium particle decay contradicts your recent theory, Doral demanded one day. It doesn't, Professor, Jai-Ho replied calmly. Thorium decay occurs within a single dimension. My theory addresses cross-dimensional interactions. Whispers spread among the students. No one challenged Doral directly. The night before the competition, Jeho made a final adjustment to his device, a small crystal chamber surrounded by quantum sensors and reality anchors. If his calculations were correct, it would prove his theory by capturing energy patterns from parallel dimensions. "It's ready," he told Su Min and Taro, who had been helping him prepare his presentation. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Su Min said, "you've already accomplished something remarkable." Taro nodded. "And we'll be there, supporting you." Jeho looked at his device, then at his friends. Tomorrow isn't just about proving Doral wrong. It's about showing what humans can contribute to galactic science. That night, unable to sleep, Jeho stood at his window watching distant stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, a tiny blue planet just beginning to understand its place in the cosmic community. Tomorrow he would take a stand, not just for himself, but for humanity's right to be taken seriously. Whatever the outcome, he would face the challenge head-on. The Interstellar Research Competition was held in the Academy's Grand Amphitheater, a massive dome chamber that could seat 1,000 beings from across the galaxy. Jeho arrived early, carrying his demonstration device in a protective case. The stage was set with various scientific instruments and a large holographic projector in the center. "Nervous?" Su Min asked, appearing beside him. Jeho nodded. "Terrified might be more accurate." "You'll be the youngest presenter by 50 years, she said. "Even being here is impressive." As the amphitheater filled, Jeho noticed a section near the front where the Academy's highest officials sat. Professor Doral was there, speaking with several elderly Arcturians. Jeho recognized the Academy Chancellor, a Moravian with crystalline skin who was said to be over 900 years old. 12 presenters today," Taro said, joining them. "You're last." Jeho watched the other scientists present their work, a Viridian's theory on dark matter flow, an Arcturian's model of supernova prediction, a Gaseous Flotian's work on atmospheric terraforming. Each presentation was followed by pointed questions from the judging panel. Finally, it was Jeho's turn. He stepped onto the stage, acutely aware of the thousands of eyes, some singular, some multiple, some not eyes at all but sensory organs, focused on him. "I present asymmetrical quantum resonance in multidimensional frameworks," Jeho began, activating the holographic display. Complex equations and models appeared in the air around him. For 15 minutes, he explained his theory, showing how traditional models fail to account for observer variations across dimensional boundaries. He noticed some judges leaning forward with interest, while others, particularly the Arcturians, maintained skeptical expressions. In conclusion, Jeho said, "This theory suggests that quantum particles exist in a state of dimensional flux, which explains anomalies in previous experiments." He finished to polite applause. Then came the questions. "Your equations contradict Doral's third principle," stated an Arcturian judge. "How do you explain this discrepancy?" Jeho took a deep breath. "With respect, Doral's third principle assumes dimensional symmetry. My research indicates this assumption is incorrect." A murmur spread through the audience. Questioning an established Arcturian principle was bold. "You claim to have evidence?" asked a Moravian judge. "Yes. I've constructed a device to demonstrate the effect." Jeho opened his case and set up his equipment. The crystal chamber glowed faintly as he activated it. This chamber contains quantum-sensitive crystals that can detect energy patterns across dimensional boundaries. Jeho adjusted several settings. When activated, it shooled. A voice interrupted him. "Chancellor, this is inappropriate." Professor Doral had stood up. "This student has clearly plagiarized advanced research. A human at his level of education could not possibly understand these concepts, let alone develop new theories." The Chancellor raised a hand for silence. "Serious allegations, Professor Doral. Student Kim, how do you respond?" Jeho faced the audience directly. "I developed this theory independently, based on observed flaws in existing models. I invite any expert to question me on any aspect of the mathematics or physical principles involved. Words, Doral scoffed. Anyone can memorize explanations. Let us see this supposed demonstration. Jai-Ho turned back to his device, hands slightly shaking. The chamber creates a controlled environment where particles exist in quantum superposition. According to my theory, these particles should interact with counterparts in parallel dimensions, creating detectable energy patterns. He activated the final sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Jai-Ho's heart sank. Then, slowly, the crystals began to glow with shifting colors. Blue, purple, green, in patterns that pulsed and swirled. These patterns represent quantum resonance across dimensional boundaries, Jai-Ho explained. Each color signature corresponds to a different parallel dimension. A holographic display showed data streaming from the device, energy readings, quantum state measurements, dimensional coordinates. A Floetian judge floated closer. These readings contradict established models. Yes, Jai-Ho agreed, because established models are incomplete. Professor Doral stormed onto the stage. This is absurd. He's manipulating the equipment to produce false readings. I assure you, the equipment functions correctly, Jai-Ho said, maintaining his composure. Then explain this. Doral pointed to a specific reading. This energy pattern is impossible according to universal constants. It's only impossible if we assume symmetrical dimensional boundaries, Jai-Ho replied. My theory predicts exactly this pattern when accounting for observer effects across dimensions. The Chancellor approached the stage. This is most unusual. Professor Doral, your objections are noted. However, the data appears consistent with student Kim's theoretical framework. A coincidence, Doral insisted, or deliberate fraud. There's one way to be certain, Jai-Ho said. He turned to the judges. My theory predicts that changing the quantum state of these particles will create a corresponding change in parallel dimensions, which we can detect as an altered resonance pattern. He adjusted a setting on his device. The crystal chamber pulsed, and the colors shifted dramatically, forming new patterns. The amphitheater fell silent. Impossible, whispered an Arcturian judge. The Chancellor studied the readings. According to all established principles, this should not work. Yet it does. He turned to Doral. Your assessment, Professor. Doral's 4 eyes blinked rapidly. The student has clearly been helped by someone. Perhaps by the human librarian. This cannot be his work alone. I can explain every component, every calculation, Jai-Ho said firmly. Test me however you wish. The Chancellor considered for a moment. The competition committee will need time to evaluate these findings. Professor Doral, as student Kim's advisor, you will oversee additional testing tomorrow. If these results can be replicated under controlled conditions, we may be witnessing a significant breakthrough. As the session ended, students and researchers crowded around Jai-Ho, asking questions about his theory and device. Through the crowd, he saw Doral watching him. All 4 eyes narrowed in anger. Later, in a quiet corridor, Su-Min and Taro found Jai-Ho. You did it. Su-Min hugged him. The whole academy is talking about your presentation. Doral looks ready to explode. Taro added. I've never seen an Arcturian so upset. Jai-Ho shook his head. It's not over. Tomorrow's test will be controlled by Doral. He'll do anything to discredit me. Then we need to be prepared, Su-Min said, determination in her voice. Let's review everything, make sure there's no way he can manipulate the results. That night, in his room, Jai-Ho couldn't sleep. His device sat on his desk, crystal chamber still occasionally pulsing with faint colors. He discovered something revolutionary, proof that dimensions interacted in ways no one had realized. But more importantly, he'd shown that human perspective had value in galactic science. Tomorrow would determine whether the Academy accepted this truth, or whether Doral's prejudice would prevail. Either way, Jai-Ho knew he had already changed something fundamental. The discovery wasn't just about quantum resonance, it was about humanity's place among the stars. The laboratory designated for Jaiho's official demonstration was 3 times larger than any he had used before. Gleaming equipment lined the walls, and a transparent observation deck above held dozens of Academy officials, including the Chancellor and the entire physics department. Jaiho arrived early to set up his device. Su Min and Taro had helped him prepare late into the night, anticipating every possible challenge Professor Doral might present. Remember, Su Min had told him, Doral knows Arcturian physics perfectly, but he doesn't understand how humans think. That's your advantage. Professor Doral entered the lab precisely at the scheduled time, accompanied by 2 senior Arcturian physicists and a Moravian recorder who would document every aspect of the demonstration. Student Kim, Doral said coldly, today you will replicate your alleged discovery under proper supervision. Any deviation from standard protocols will be noted. I understand, Professor, Jaiho replied, keeping his voice steady. The Chancellor's voice came through the lab's communication system. We will proceed with this supervised demonstration. Professor Doral will oversee the testing, while the panel will evaluate the results independently. Doral gestured to Jaiho's device. You claim this apparatus can detect quantum resonance across dimensional boundaries. Yes, Professor. Then you won't object to using Academy equipment instead of your own potentially altered device. Jaiho had expected this. I have no objection, as long as the equipment includes quantum-sensitive crystals and dimensional boundary sensors. Doral's eyes narrowed slightly. He hadn't expected Jaiho to agree so readily. Very well. He signaled to the assistants, who brought forward Academy equipment. Construct your experiment using these components. Jaiho examined the equipment. It was newer and more precise than what he had used, but the principles were the same. He began assembling a new version of his device, explaining each step to the observers. The crystal matrix must be aligned precisely with the quantum field generator, Jaiho said, carefully positioning components. The dimensional sensors need to be calibrated to detect frequencies beyond normal spacetime parameters. Above in the observation deck, Jaiho noticed several non-Arcturian scientists leaning forward with interest. Even some who had seemed skeptical yesterday were watching intently. When the device was assembled, Doral stepped forward. Before activation, I wish to inspect the calibrations. Jaiho nodded. Doral spent several minutes checking settings, occasionally making small adjustments and taking notes. Jaiho recognized what the professor was doing, subtly altering settings to ensure the experiment would fail. Professor, Jaiho said calmly, you've adjusted the quantum field alignment by 0.03 degrees. My theory requires precise alignment with dimensional boundaries. Doral looked up sharply. The standard alignment is sufficient. For standard quantum experiments, yes, but dimensional resonance requires greater precision. The Moravian recorder noted this exchange. In the observation deck, the Chancellor leaned forward. Allow student Kim to use his preferred settings, the Chancellor instructed. This is his theory being tested. Doral reluctantly stepped back. Jaiho readjusted the settings, then took a deep breath. The demonstration will proceed in 3 stages, he explained. First, I'll activate the quantum field generator to create a stable matrix. Second, I'll initiate dimensional scanning to detect parallel resonance patterns. Finally, I'll demonstrate how changes in our dimension create corresponding changes across dimensional boundaries. Jaiho activated the first sequence. The crystal matrix began to glow with a soft blue light. Readings on the monitoring screen showed quantum particles entering superposition states. Stage 1 successful, noted the Moravian recorder. Jaiho moved to the second stage, initiating dimensional scan. For a moment, nothing happened. Jaiho felt a flash of panic. Had Doral sabotaged something he hadn't noticed? Then, gradually, the crystals began to pulse with changing colors, just as they had during the competition. The colors represent energy signatures from parallel dimensions, Jaiho explained. Each dimension has a unique quantum frequency that resonates with our particles. Data streams appeared on the monitors, showing patterns similar to those from his original device. Several scientists in the observation deck began talking excitedly. Doral frowned. These readings could be explained by standard quantum fluctuations. If that were true, the patterns would be random, Jiaho countered. These are structured and repeatable. He pointed to specific data points. These signatures appear consistently across multiple scans. The Chancellor's voice came through the speaker. Professor Doral, would you agree these results are consistent with student Kim's presentation yesterday? Doral hesitated. The patterns are similar, yes, but that doesn't prove his theory. Then we proceed to stage 3, the Chancellor said. Jiaho nodded. For the final demonstration, I will show how changes in quantum states here affect parallel dimensions. He adjusted several controls, creating a specific pattern in the crystal matrix. The colors swirled and shifted, forming new configurations. Now, I'll reverse the pattern, Jiaho said. He entered new commands. The crystals pulsed brightly, then reorganized into a completely different pattern. The data on the screens changed correspondingly. According to my theory, Jiaho explained, we've just altered quantum states across dimensional boundaries. The new patterns represent the response from parallel dimensions. The lab fell silent. Even Doral seemed momentarily at a loss for words. One of the Arcturian assistants spoke up. This contradicts Doral's third principle of dimensional isolation. Yes, Jiaho agreed. Because dimensions aren't isolated. They're interconnected through quantum resonance. Doral finally found his voice. This is merely an interesting anomaly, not proof of a new theory. The student has created an elaborate illusion that mimics dimensional interaction. Then explain the mathematical consistency, challenged Jiaho. He brought up equations on the main screen. Every pattern matches the predictions of my theoretical framework, including variations we didn't test yesterday. The Chancellor spoke again. Professor Doral, your assessment. Doral looked trapped. The mathematics appear consistent, but I maintain this cannot be the work of a first-year student, especially a human. He must have had assistance or stolen research. Jiaho felt a surge of frustration. Test me. Ask me anything about the theory, the mathematics, the practical applications. I developed this myself. The Chancellor was silent for a moment. Very well. Professor Kurtal, you are our theoretical mathematician. Please question student Kim. An elderly Arcturian with 6 eyes stepped forward from the observation deck. For the next 30 minutes, Professor Kurtal asked increasingly complex questions about dimensional mathematics, quantum field theory, and the implications of asymmetrical resonance. Jiaho answered each one clearly, sometimes working through calculations on the lab's display screens. Finally, Professor Kurtal turned to the Chancellor. The student demonstrates comprehensive understanding of his theory. I find no evidence of plagiarism or outside assistance. His grasp of the mathematical framework exceeds that of many established researchers. Murmurs spread through the observation deck. Doral stood rigid, all 4 eyes fixed on Jiaho. The Chancellor addressed the room. Based on today's demonstration and the expert assessment, I believe we are witnessing a genuine scientific breakthrough. Student Kim has not only developed a revolutionary theory, but has successfully demonstrated it under controlled conditions. Jiaho felt a wave of relief wash over him. Looking up at the observation deck, he saw Su Min and Taro smiling broadly. This experiment will be recorded in Academy archives, the Chancellor continued. Further testing will be arranged to explore the implications of dimensional resonance. As the observers began to file out, many stopping to congratulate him, Jiaho noticed Professor Doral standing alone, his expression unreadable. Despite everything, Jiaho approached him. Professor, I hope you can see now that humans have something valuable to contribute to galactic science. Doral's eyes narrowed. You have proven nothing except your own arrogance, human. The Academy Board may be impressed by parlor tricks, but your enrollment in this institution remains an error, one I intend to correct. With that, Doral turned and left the laboratory. leaving Jaiho to wonder what the professor's next move would be. Jiho sat nervously outside the academy board chamber, waiting to be called in. 3 days had passed since his successful demonstration, but instead of celebrating, he found himself summoned to an emergency meeting of the highest academy officials. Su-min paced in front of him. "This doesn't make sense. Your theory was proven correct." The chancellor himself acknowledged it. "Professor Doral has significant influence," Taro reminded them. "He's been at the academy for 2 centuries. The massive doors to the chamber opened. A Moravian assistant gestured for Jaiho to enter alone. He stood, straightened his uniform, and took a deep breath. "Whatever happens," Su-min whispered, "you've already changed everything." The board chamber was circular, with a ring of elevated seats where 12 beings from different species sat. The chancellor occupied the central position, with Professor Doral standing at a podium to the right. A second podium waited for Jaiho. "Student Kim," the chancellor began, "you have been called before this board to address serious concerns regarding your academic status." Jaiho bowed respectfully. "I understand, Chancellor. Professor Doral has formally requested your removal from the academy program." The chancellor gestured to Doral. "Professor, present your case." Doral stepped forward, his blue skin darkened with emotion. "Honored board members, I have served this institution for 217 years. In that time, I have upheld the highest standards of scientific excellence and academic integrity." He pointed at Jaiho. "This human has been at our academy for less than 3 months, yet he claims to have developed a theory that contradicts principles established over centuries. Even if his experiments show interesting results, we must consider the source." Jaiho watched as Doral displayed images from Earth's history, early space exploration, primitive quantum computers, humanity's first contact with alien species just 15 years ago. "Humans are a young species," Doral continued. "Their neural structures lack the complexity needed for advanced cosmic understanding. I propose that Student Kim has either been assisted by non-human entities or has somehow accessed restricted research." "And your evidence of this?" asked a Flotian board member. "The evidence is the impossibility of the alternative," Doral replied. "No human could develop such a theory independently. It defies logical possibility." The chancellor turned to Jaiho. "Student Kim, how do you respond?" Jaiho stepped to his podium. "Respected board members, Professor Doral is correct about one thing. Humans are newcomers to galactic science, but he is wrong about our capabilities." Jaiho displayed his own images: the human brain, neural mapping, creativity studies. "Our brains evolved differently than Arcturian minds, where Arcturians excel at logical progression and systematic analysis. Humans often make intuitive leaps between seemingly unrelated concepts." He brought up split-screen comparisons between traditional Arcturian physics models and his theory. "I noticed patterns that contradicted established models because I wasn't constrained by centuries of Arcturian teaching. I didn't know certain connections were considered impossible, so I explored them anyway." The board members leaned forward, studying the comparisons with interest. "My theory works," Jaiho continued, "not because I stole research or had help, but because I approached the problem from a completely different perspective. That's what humans can contribute to galactic science. New ways of seeing." Before the board could respond, the chamber doors opened. A tall, distinguished Galactic Council representative entered, followed by 2 assistants. "Ambassador Threll," the chancellor said, rising. "We were not expecting the Galactic Science Council to attend this hearing." "This matter has drawn significant attention," Ambassador Threll replied. "The council reviewed Student Kim's research independently and found it worthy of further investigation." Doral looked shocked. "The council has no jurisdiction over academy admissions." "True," Threll agreed, "but we do have oversight regarding scientific ethics and discrimination cases." The word discrimination hung in the air. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Threll approached Jaiho. Your theory on dimensional resonance has been reviewed by scientists from 17 species. All agree it represents a genuine breakthrough in understanding quantum interactions across dimensional boundaries. The ambassador turned to address the board. More importantly, this case reveals a troubling pattern of bias against emerging species. Our investigation found that Professor Dorrell systematically blocked human research, denied resources to human students, and attempted to discredit valid scientific work based solely on species origin. Dorrell's four eyes widened. This is outrageous. I have maintained scientific standards. You have maintained Arcturian standards, Threll interrupted. The galaxy contains millions of intelligent species, each with unique cognitive approaches. The Academy was founded to bring these perspectives together, not to enforce conformity to one species' thinking. The Chancellor looked grave. Ambassador, what does the Council recommend? 2 actions, Threll replied. First, student Kim's theory should be officially recognized and integrated into the Academy curriculum. Second, Professor Dorrell should be removed from his position as department chair and as an advisor to non-Arcturian students. Murmurs spread through the board. Dorrell stood frozen, his skin paling to a light blue. This institution has stood for 5,000 years, Dorrell finally said. Opening our doors to primitive species will degrade everything we've built. The Chancellor studied Dorrell for a long moment. No, Professor. What degrades our institution is refusing to grow and learn. The evidence before us is clear. Student Kim has made a legitimate scientific discovery, one that your prejudice nearly prevented from coming to light. The Chancellor turned to the board. I propose we accept the Council's recommendations. All in favor. One by one, the 11 lights turned green around the table. Only one remained red. The senior Arcturian board member who had been Dorrell's mentor. The board has decided, the Chancellor announced. Professor Dorrell, you are relieved of your chairmanship and advisory duties, effective immediately. Student Kim, you are formally recognized for your contribution to dimensional physics. Your remedial status is removed, and you will be placed in advanced studies appropriate to your demonstrated abilities. Jai-Ho bowed deeply. Thank you, Chancellor. Ambassador Threll approached Jai-Ho as the meeting concluded. The Galactic Science Council would like to establish a new research department focusing on human Arcturian collaborative science. We believe your discovery is just the beginning of what different perspectives can achieve together. Would you be interested in joining this initiative? It would be an honor, Jai-Ho replied. Outside the chamber, Su-Min and Taro waited anxiously. When Jai-Ho emerged smiling, they rushed forward. What happened? Su-Min asked. Dorrell has been removed, Jai-Ho told them. And they're creating a new department for collaborative research between species. Taro made a whistling sound of amazement. You've changed everything. As they walked through the Academy corridors, other students and professors stopped to congratulate Jai-Ho. Some had already begun incorporating his theories into their own research. That evening, Jai-Ho stood at the observation deck overlooking the stars. Earth was visible as a tiny blue dot in the distance. Thinking about home? Su-Min asked, joining him. Thinking about the future, Jai-Ho replied. Today wasn't just about my theory. It was about proving that humans belong here, among the stars, and among the great scientific minds of the galaxy. The first of many human contributions, Su-Min agreed. As they watched the stars together, Jai-Ho knew that somewhere across the Academy, Professor Dorrell was contemplating a universe that had suddenly become much larger and more complex than his Arcturian mindset had allowed. The professor had failed to recognize that diversity of thought was not a weakness, but the greatest strength of galactic science. Jai-Ho smiled. The recognition he had received today wasn't just for himself, it was for humanity's potential. And that was just beginning to be understood among the stars.